The NaviPro IT Break, 15 entertaining minutes with our experts on hot topics. They're designed to help you keep up to date on the latest IT trends.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this IT Break episode 50. I am your host, Pierre Tocci, Senior Consultant, IT Transformation Strategies at NaviPro. And today my guest is Stan Wisseman of Micro Focus Sales Manager. Good afternoon, Stan.
Good afternoon, Pierre.
Stan, I will do something special today. I've introduced you as a sales manager, but I don't want people to say, oh yeah, another sales guy, what's he going to talk about, blah, 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 blah. But Stan has lived security concerns because he used to be a CISO, Chief Information Security Officer. So I would gather that you know exactly what you are talking about because you've lived it.
I've been in the seat. I have done information security since the early 80s and now lead the security strategy team here at CyberRes.
Well, it will be a very interesting conversation for this 15-minute break. Tell me, Stan, you've chosen the topic of DevSec Ops. What is this and why does it matter?
Well, I mean, DevSec Ops is really an extension of DevOps. And sometimes you hear it as secure DevOps. Sometimes you just hear it as DevOps, right? And security is not mentioned in it. But it's the whole idea of including security into the DevOps CI/CD pipeline, shifting left. And it's important because, just like the purpose of DevOps is really to be able to produce software more rapidly, get your releases into production faster, right? But at the same time, you can also release vulnerabilities faster into production as well. And so you want security integrated in so you can mitigate that risk of exposing your applications to greater harm.
Yeah, what you're describing right now is does really matter because we've seen in the news the latest big hacks. They've gone through applications they don't care where the money is. They know that we can follow the money through one application, and this is what we're targeting. Is this reality? They target the application and the weaknesses of the application, therefore the code.
Exactly right. I mean, so they take advantage of those weaknesses to get to the back-end database. And many times that back-end database may have, sensitive PI information, whether it be credit cards or healthcare records, whether it might be. So the weaknesses in the apps are really exploited by these bad actors.
Yeah, absolutely. You've mentioned that you've been at this for 30 years. I'm sure that the positioning of security 30 years ago versus today is completely different.
It is. Actually, when I got started, we were focusing on operating systems. So we weren't worried about the application layer. We were trying to build security into the operating system. And then just flashback even to the early 2000s in the context of software security, it was around finding those security activities, or Gary McGraw would call them touch points in the software development lifecycle. And we did a good job of defining what those touch points were. And it's sort of blown up with this more agile DevOps kind of environment because the time that we needed for those hard gates to do security architecture reviews, to do the threat modeling, to do code review, many times manually, that isn't conducive to the pace of development nowadays.
Yeah. That's true. Years ago, we had months to plan a dev, a prototype, a sandbox, and so forth. And the coding was procedural, read one line after the next. Threats were not coming from all over the place. Today, it's rapid, agile development. That's what we want because of the economic conditions. So I'm sure that it exposes a lot of coding weaknesses because we're all rushed into agile development.
Exactly. And so the number of weaknesses are up, and the bad actors are looking at exploiting them. And it doesn't matter who you are. I mean, so there is no real discernment anymore, especially if you're talking about ransomware, right?
Yeah.
They're looking for any way to get in, and it may be through a phishing attack, or again, like you say, a weakness in the app.
Yeah. What I've seen through the work we do with customers is that a lot of customers trust that the application that the vendor will be using to get in the systems or monitor the systems, that, hey, he's the vendor, he knows what he's talking about. At the end of the keyboard, there are still humans and development teams for the vendors.
Right, and you would like to think that the owner of the app is doing what is necessary to raise the assurance that the application is doing all it can to protect your information that you're inputting into that application. You know,
Right.
you're doing what they ask you to do, to enter that social security number or whatever they want. You're hoping they're protecting it. You're making that assumption that you can trust them. And unfortunately, we're finding time and time again that that's not the case. And so you have to do more to actually ensure that the applications that we're using are actually secure.
Tell me, Stan, if you were to, if you inherited a development team, 2 bodies or 10 bodies or 1,000 bodies, okay, and you looked at the landscape and said, you know what, guys, we are not secured as to what our commitments are today. How would you implement DevSecOps? Where would you start?
Well, part of it is education, right? I mean, I think we cannot assume that developers understand secure coding best practices.
Okay.
Unfortunately, out of school or even in the work environment, they don't get exposed to those best practices. And so you need to help them understand. And some of the most effective ways of doing this is gamification, either as things like Secure Code Warrior, or even doing hackathon type things where you're exposing them to maybe even penetrate their own code. Have them hack their own application. And so, that's how you can use a SQL injection vulnerability. But you need to raise their awareness, and there are different ways you can do that, right? So that's one place I would start. The other is honestly giving them the tools that they need to be able to raise visibility to those weaknesses. And there are different kinds of tools out there now, static code analysis, dynamic, that you can actually test your software, whether it be in the coding phase or when it's a running app, to find those weaknesses. And if they don't know where it is, they don't understand that it exists, then they again don't have the understanding how to potentially fix it.
Now, let's say I'm a traditional programmer with all the skill sets in the world to do what I do best, is code. And I have Stan in front of me. My new boss says, you know what, guys? Today we're going to implement DevSecOps. I know nothing about security. Who should be my best friend, and why should I work with that best friend?
So a new best friend potentially would be somebody we call a security champion. And so I've again, that could come from the development side of the house, but is somebody that can help bridge that gap between the development shop and the security shop, who understands how to speak development language, but also has been trained up and hopefully can sit at the table and during the sprints and understand how to communicate the importance of security to the developers. And so we're seeing that role of security champion or evangelist or black belt in security increasingly pop up in organizations as a way of bridging that gap and helping people get up to speed faster.
So what you're telling me is that at the onset of maybe that architecture, but how you will design your code and so forth, there should be somebody at the table speaking on behalf of security.
It really does make a big difference. Because let's face it, otherwise the priorities they have is about the time to prod, the features that they're trying to implement, and it many times is not a pressing concern to them as other factors and drivers in development.
It's true, because in the work I do, when I manage ERP implementation, risk assessment, and stuff, we have pressure from the end users for the bells and whistles. I wanted to do this, and that. I need it now, and and we're there. No, it's not the way you want. We need to protect you from what you want because you don't understand how vulnerable you are as a demander, right? So the coders are stuck with that.
Exactly. And sometimes, again, I go back to the old touch points that Gary McGraw propagated. Threat modeling is also a way of potentially raising that awareness, right? Not necessarily the heavyweight threat modeling that was espoused by Microsoft back in the day, but at least a lightweight model, and there's some tools out there that help you understand how applications can be exploited. You're getting some awareness then of what can be done to this application as you roll it out that can motivate you to do more on the security side.
Now let's switch hats, Stan. As a micro-focused sales manager, how do you guide your customers with the tool sets available for micro-focus?
So we have an emphasis on, in our Fortify portfolio, on helping our customers integrate security testing throughout the life cycle, no matter what model is being used, whether it be the classic waterfall or more agile and DevOps kind of models. And it's about integrating in as seamlessly as possible into that dev tool chain that the developers are using. And so we can integrate in, if you want to do scans during the build process, we can do that. If you want to have the developers do it and have a plugin with their IDE, we can do that. If you want to have late lifecycle dynamic testing, that's great. If you want to shift dynamic testing left and actually leverage functional test scripts, we can do dynamic scans during that phase as well. So we have all kinds of different ways that we can support development shops, whether it be on-prem or we have it as a service. And so, and some organizations are doing a hybrid. They're taking advantage of the on-prem products for the development teams. That's great, but then they can leverage a service for the build level or later life cycle. It's a combination that can mix and match.
What you're saying is really interesting, Stan, but I see a big problem right now, and we're living it all over. There are very few security people available out there to hire
a bit of a shortage,
or to contract,
right? A bit of a shortage, yeah.
How do we do this? Could a programmer be able at least to use some of the tool sets and have a good sense as to whether he's doing the right stuff or not with his coding?
You can certainly train up programmers to do that, but you touch a valid point as far as the shortage of properly skilled individuals, right? Trying to find software security engineers and architects is difficult. I've been in that position of trying to hire them. That's honestly why the as a service model is very attractive for a lot of organizations to ramp up quickly, and then if they have a desire to do so, they can potentially staff up their own on-prem capability. But a lot of organizations can get using Fortify on Demand up to tens, hundreds, thousands of applications scanned a week, a month, very rapidly, and then be able to get those results and act on them. And so that is one way in which people are dealing with the resource challenge, because that certainly impacts the model that you go with. If you don't have the people, it's difficult to actually execute a plan.
Yeah, it's reality now. It's kind of hard to hire security people, and they won't want their career path just to search code and see whether it's good or not. A lot of them have more ambitions.
Yeah, and another approach, Pierre, the CISO at Equifax is a great example, where he has basically pushed it on development and basically said it's their responsibility to do the testing of their applications for security. He has the governance. He has the right to validate that applications aren't going into prod with above the threshold of vulnerabilities, but he's pushed it on them. And so he doesn't have to he has to train them up.
Yeah.
Right. There's an expectation that, the security organization is going to be involved with helping them understand how to do secure coding. But that helped him with the scaling aspect. You can't hire enough security specialists, right? He has to get the developers to recognize that they own part of that challenge.
What you're saying makes sense. Yeah. It should be, they own the development cycle, they own the QA, right? They own the implementation. They need to be on spec what was required. And part of what is required is also delivering with a good risk assessments and governance to manage that risk. So you're absolutely right. They should be looking at this now.
One of the things that I've seen that's been effective in helping them get that right is if development management already has an MBO, management by objectives, around code quality. Well, security defects are just a defect. And that impacts and should impact their quality metrics.
Well, I could resume this really quickly. When we have a minute or two as a closing argument, Stan, but if I just forget about the management by objective, do I want hackers to use my application to go steal money somewhere else at my customers? That's the big question.
Right. And the answer should be no.
There you go.
I guess I just see that the DevSecOps practices and tools are still evolving and emerging, right? It's a fast-moving space. We as a vendor are trying to keep up with the languages, keep up with the frameworks, keep up with the tools that we have to integrate with and provide the APIs we need. But it's a rapid, continuous integration and development kind of world that we're living in. And the bottom line, we cannot ignore application security. The bad actors just are not allowing us to do so.
They got smarter. Well, Stan, that was a very interesting conversation. Very interesting. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Folks, thank you for this 50th edition of our IT Break. My guest today was Stan Wisseman, ex-CISO and sales manager at Micro Focus. This podcast is available at our hub at content, hub.navipro.com, along with the 49th previous series of webinars, seminars, documents. So I do invite you to reach out and be a subscriber to our content. Stan, thank you again for having joined me today.
And you're folks, welcome. It was good to be your 50th.
Let's celebrate. And please stay tuned for our 51st to come up shortly, and hope you'll be with us again. Thank you very much on behalf of NaviPro.
You want access to a range of cutting-edge information? Go to our online content area at hub.navipro.com.